Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm going to give it about 10 seconds for people to log in, to turn their sound on, to do all those kind of Zoom things. Welcome, welcome. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dylan Rodriguez, he, him pronouns. I'm the co-director of the Center for Ideas in Society, and I'm a professor in the Department of Black Study and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies at UC Riverside. It's a privilege to welcome you to Disturbing the Lines. I'm looking forward to a wonderful, engaging, critical discussion this evening, this afternoon, this morning. This event is co-sponsored by the Memory and Resistance Laboratory and the Decolonizing Humanism programming stream at the Center for Ideas in Society. I ask everyone to please note that the webinar is being recorded for potential posting on the Center for Ideas in Society YouTube channel. Please know that captions should be available on your Zoom interface. And because this is a webinar, as we proceed, please feel free to submit your questions for the panelists through the Q&A function on your Zoom interface as well. My job is to quickly introduce things. And for people who are maybe unfamiliar, a lot of North American universities include boilerplate land acknowledgements in their introduction of various campus events, including commencements. I humbly dissent from that practice of acknowledgement by instead offering a modest urging and provocation toward activation, mobilization, and collective study and movement against conditions of occupation, anti-Black violence, and coloniality, including and especially the issues that we'll be discussing this evening. I want to open the occasion first by acknowledging Rupert and Jeanette Costo's legacy of reclaiming, protecting, and sustaining Indigenous presence at UC Riverside, including epistemological, archival, and physical forms of Indigenous thought and being. The University of California is a settler colonial institution that occupies unceded land and ecologies continuously inhabited by original and ongoing human caretakers, including the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples on and around the UC Riverside campus. This institution is populated by Indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world, many of whom are among faculty, students, and staff. This fact makes it ever more distressing that the University of California has failed to repatriate and return hundreds of thousands of Indigenous and Native peoples' remains and artifacts to their tribes and peoples of origin, despite a decades-long legal mandate and recent incriminating state audit. UC Riverside is blocks away from the site where the Riverside Police Department stole the life of 19-year-old Taisha Miller, a matter that continually imprints the centrality of anti-Black state and extra-state violence to this institution and the surrounding geography. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with which UC Riverside has a cooperating police relationship, is regionally and nationally notorious for creating cruel and fatal conditions in local jails for people who are awaiting trial and cannot afford bail. It is thus a shared responsibility to address how the University of California is actively complicit in long and ongoing histories of anti-Black state and state-condoned violence, especially as university police forces continuously accumulate a record of harassment, intimidation, surveillance, and aggression against profiled, criminalized, and otherwise targeted peoples and communities. I will note in particular Palestinian peoples and communities in their diasporas. So it's thus with a sense of urgent obligation that I offer these words in place of the sanctioned so-called land acknowledgement. I'm honored to open this precious occasion by calling forward new, old, collective, and experimental efforts to create decolonized abolitionist and liberated futures. Welcome. It's now my pleasure to pass the mic to Sasha Perry.
Thank you, Dylan, for a very powerful and really special opening. And thank you for everyone to being here and for my panelists for inviting me. I'd like to open up briefly with some community guidelines and values that the four of us are going to hold to and that we ask everyone involved in this discussion also hold to. We are basing them on the Jewish ethics called Musar, which is referenced in the Tanakh, also called, for some of you, the Bible, and elaborated more in the Middle Ages. And the first characteristic we're going to hold to is emet, which is truth. Speak from your own truth. relate to only I statements instead of generalizations, and using all and every declaratives. Be mindful of intention and impact. Both are important. Anava, which is the Hebrew word for humility. Occupy a rightful space, neither take up too much or too little. And rachamim, which is compassion. Permission, we give ourselves and everyone in this room permission to be messy and imperfect and non-linear. We support authentic and vulnerable communication in the process of creating empathy and concern that moves us to action. It is tradition in Jewish spaces that when we are gathered to learn, that we dedicate our learning. And I'd like to dedicate this time and this conversation to the 158 Palestinians who have been murdered in the last 24 hours in Gaza. We are taught in our tradition that to take one life is to take an entire world, and to save one life is to save an entire world. Collectively, we mourn these and the other over 24,000 worlds that have been destroyed in Palestine since October. May their memories be a blessing to all who love them. And may we as Jews and Israelis honor their lives by acting for lasting justice and freedom. With that, I would like to pass it to Hadar to open us up with grounding and meditation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sasha, for opening us with those beautiful community values and intentions and that beautiful dedication. As we are entering this learning space, just wanted to take a few moments to presence the body. Sometimes when we think about learning, we think about the mind and consuming information and ideas and thoughts, but when we're doing political learning, it's really important to also acknowledge where the body is at and what the body can receive. So wherever you are, I just invite you, if it's easeful for you, you're welcome to close your eyes, but just take a moment of breath to just feel this gentle inhale and exhale. Just notice how you're doing in the present moment of now. Notice that there's a ground underneath you, this earth that's holding the body. And just notice your nervous system, the aliveness in you, and the availability and capacity that you are in right now to hear and receive this panel. And just noticing and acknowledging that wherever you are is totally okay. There's no right or wrong. It's just giving permission to what is alive now. So we'll just take one more collective breath here to really ground us in this collective moment of now, so that we can really be attuned to what wants to happen in this panel here. What learning, what conversations, what insights. So I'll just do one more inhale. And then exhale. And just an invitation throughout this panel to come back to the breath. If ever something becomes challenging or you notice an emotion arising, just permission the breath to flow with this inhale and exhale. And I'll pass it to you, Meital.
Thank you all so much. Can we have Asaf here as well, please? Great. Thank you so much for that opening and that grounding. Dylan, Sasha, Hadar, feel my body, I feel here, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah, we're gonna start just to give everyone a little run of the day. We're going to introduce ourselves right now, and we're going to use that introduction to introduce ourselves and also how we've arrived into anti-Zionism. We each arrived here in different ways, and I think there's a lot of medicine in hearing that. And then we're going to ask each other some questions and respond from our hearts as best as we can. And then we're going to open it to question from the audience. And yeah, the way that we're holding it is, there's many things that we agree on, including anti-Zionism, and many things that we don't. And there's a lot of beauty and again, medicine in those places. And I really want to invite the audience also to be with us in those tensions and in those discomfort, and maybe all open to something new tonight. So I will start. My name is meital yaniv. I use they them pronouns. My first name means dew water, like the morning dew in Hebrew. My last name means to bear fruit. I'm an artist, I'm a writer. I recently published the book by the title Bloodlines, which is a prayer for Palestine and a prayer to bring the Israeli identity and state to a loving and caring death. And my journey to anti-Zionism has been a long and unwinding, and I see it as a spiral more than anything else, to be honest. And I see it as like a spiral with no end. And I was raised in an extremely Zionistic family with a lot of pillars for the state of Israel, a lot of war heroes and IDF commanders, and starting with grandparents who were recruiters for the Lehi, which is a known Jewish terrorist organization that was fighting the British off the land, and Mossad agents, and also a descendant of Holocaust survivors. So I was raised very specifically. I can share here that when I was 18 years old, I voted for Bibi Netanyahu because that was what I was raised to do, and the set of beliefs and values that I was given. And when I joined the army, I joined the Air Force. And after 6 months of service, I don't like to say service, after 6 months of being in the army, my base was moved from Tel-Aviv to the south, and I was asked to send planes, to fuel planes that were going into Gaza. And after that mission, I had my first panic attack, couldn't enter the base, got grounded to the base. There was a trial, there was punishment. And there was a really deep need to take my life because I felt like that moment of breakage within myself where I couldn't really do the thing I was raised to do. And I really see it. I really believe that indoctrination, that IDF army uniform got stitched on me in the womb, as long with like all the like why it needs to be there, all that information into like the bloodstream. So yeah, and leaving the army, I was 19, and it started a process that I'm still in, that I will be in for the rest of my life, which is undoing that indoctrination, brainwashing of Israeliness and Zionism, and coming to this place where I see myself as an anti-Zionist. I see myself as someone who stands for Palestinian liberation and self-determination by any means necessary. And I see myself as someone who has a lot of still undoing and learning to do in that process. Yeah, I'll end here. I will pass it to Asaf.
Yeah, my name is Asaf. I am an Israeli social worker here in Brooklyn. I was born in Tel Aviv, and I was I'm gonna go over my history with anti-Zionism. I was born. Oh, but before that, I would say that I am one of the founders of Shoresh, a new Israeli anti-Zionist organization here in the United States. So I was born in Tel Aviv, and my parents are leftist Zionists. They have long supported the two-state solutions, and they opposed the 1967 occupation. But and so that was the kind of environment in which I grew. So I think quite different from Meital's upbringing. But I had a break with Zionism when I did not serve in the military. I got an exemption, even though I wanted to serve. I got an exemption on a medical exemption, and when you don't serve in the military, it opens this gap between you and Israeli society, and it's a really good opportunity to start asking questions. So around the same time, I started to show up to protests in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And I started to actually meet with actual Palestinians, which when you grow up in Tel Aviv, that kind of doesn't necessarily happen. It didn't happen that much in my life because segregation in Israel is so powerful. So I started hanging out with Palestinians, and it became very clear to me that there is no framework under Zionism, under this idea of the Jewish ethno-state that can affirm Palestinian humanity and that can lead us towards justice. And so I became an anti-Zionist, and what that means to me is that I support freedom and democracy from the river to the sea, and the right of return. I will pass it to Hadar.
Thank you, Asaf. So, hi everyone. My name is Hadar. I was born in Jerusalem and very much identify as a Jerusalemite. My family has been in Jerusalem for 10 generations and also have lineage roots in Aleppo and in Baghdad and Kurdistan. So come from, what is known as a Mizrahi identity, which Mizrahi is a Hebrew word that refers to Jews from the so-called Middle East region, including Arab Jews, Kurdish Jews, Persian Jews, Armenian Jews, right? This identity. So I grew up in a very, very Mizrahi home. And I grew up, especially with a lot of stories from my parents and my grandparents around the racism that they faced in the Israeli state around Mizrahi identity, which included, right, wiping out the Arabic language as a Jewish language, because my grandparents spoke Arabic, but, it wasn't something that was passed on. And just this overall, I grew up with just a lot of shame around my identity. And I grew up in the time, especially in the 90s in Jerusalem, where it's like, if you listen to Arabic music at home, or if you were in some level Arab, right, Arab Jewish in that way, it just was something to be embarrassed of. And that's definitely how I grew up. And it took me some time to disentangle that. In Hebrew, we have this phrase, right, called lihishtaknez, which is basically to assimilate into Ashkenazi identity. And it was something that was really intense in my family dynamic because I had some people in my family were very against it, very much against it. And then other people who were like, this is the way for us to, you know, get more successful in life. So just growing up with that complexity. And I was very, very close to my grandma who was born in the Old City in the 30s and had many Palestinian friends until the day she died. And when she died, that's for me when I started being much more public about Palestine and Palestinian solidarity, because it felt really personal to me in so many ways. But mostly because when I lost my grandma, it wasn't just the grief of losing my grandma, but it was also the grief of losing a world she knew, which was the Jerusalem pre-48, which is the stories that I grew up on. So for me, it's like her loss was also this, I feel like I inherited this responsibility to tell the story of my personal family lineage, and this, you know, what it means to have been Jewish on that land for so long, and as well as to build relationships with Palestinians and to see what is happening to Palestinians, and to reject Zionism in that way that puts Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims as the enemy of the Jews, right? This very flattened system. And you know, I think my life has been so much about, as an Arab Jewish woman, is like really feeling the pain of what that did to me personally in terms of my own identity crisis, in terms of my own relationship to self and belonging. And the way that I healed through that is through actually, through honestly a lot of my Palestinian community who saw the impacts of Zionism on the Arab Jewish community as well. So a lot of my work now has centered around Arab Jewish education and writing, and also building solidarity between Arab Jews and Palestinians, and what that can create in the discourse and in the movement, and what does that mean for us to unite against Zionism together. So I'll pass it off to Sasha.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha. I use they, them pronouns. Originally from the desert of Las Vegas, and now live on Tongva land in Los Angeles, where I am a documentary film editor, as well as a rabbinic student. I am also the only American non-Israeli on this panel, so I'll name that. And I think what that means in terms of how I came to anti-Zionism is that it's probably a lot less fraught with tension than it is for my other panelists, and possibly very similar to a lot of American Jews. I was not raised religious, though I am obviously a rabbi in training now, and probably was not aware of the way Zionism in Israel was sort of infiltrated into my upbringing, in terms of, you know, small ways of Israeli folk dance at school, and Israel Independence Day being celebrated at synagogue. You know, our big thing in my time, I don't know if I'm old enough to use that phrase, but obviously was, you know, the push for us to go on birthright. And that was not a push to get American Jews interested in Jewish tradition and heritage at all, right? That was because you could do that clearly here. That was a push to get people connected to the state, devoid of Jewish tradition and religion. I became a journalist really young, and was working on documentaries throughout high school and early in college, and was able to go to Palestine. And in 2006, I was there filming with communities that were losing access to their houses and their fields and their vineyards. I am originally an Earth liberation activist. I was part of Earth First and Sea Shepherd throughout my life. And I was working here on stopping mines in Arizona and in the southern part of Tucson. The native populations were also losing abilities to get to their sacred lands. And so when I went to Palestine, it was really clear that the same thing was happening, and the understanding that the struggles were the same and our resistance needed to be the same was really clear to me. I particularly, when I came back, I watched a movie called Death in Gaza, which is really powerful. And if you can find it online somewhere, I have a DVD copy, but who has a DVD player? Not me, not even me. But the filmmaker was killed by Israeli soldiers during the filmmaking. It's on camera, but you don't see it. And I remember being really impacted as both a journalist and a Jew and a person that was filming social justice films. And I think that started my biggest push towards working more in solidarity with Palestinian liberation. When I was there in that same trip, I was able to participate in protection of homes during home demolitions in the West Bank, where groups of American citizens occupied Palestinian homes with the naive and incredibly privileged concept that surely the Israeli soldiers wouldn't murder us if we're in the homes, as opposed to if the Palestinians were there, they would probably still bulldoze it. And so that was a big thing in the early 2000s. That was 20 years ago. Sorry, I just did the math on the spot. And not a lot has changed. Indiscriminate home demolitions are still occurring and are occurring in the West Bank today based on what they claim to be happening in Gaza. And now that I'm a rabbi, student, sorry, that was too soon. I do see the Palestinian liberation as part of my spiritual practice and as part of my rabbinate. And that is causing, tension that I don't particularly care about. I think that if there exists a Judaism that is going to punish those that stand up against mass murder, then there's a good chance I don't really want to be involved in that kind of Judaism. And I see it as part of my work to make sure that there is space for anti-Zionist Jews to be able to access Jewish tradition and Jewish faith, because I see it as a liberatory practice in itself. And that, I think we are going to move into questions of each other. And since I'm unmuted, I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, which is very easy for me as the American anti-Zionist religious Jew in the group, is to ask each of you what differences, or how to phrase this properly, what the differences you feel are being anti-Zionist in Israel versus anti-Zionist in America. You all have been there and been here and hold these identities in politics in both spaces. And I'm curious, as a person who doesn't have to worry about those things, like what that's been like for you all. And I will have Meital speak first, just so there's some order.
Thank you. I think for me, so I moved from Tel Aviv to Turtle Island 11 years ago now. I moved here for school, and that move was really crucial for me because it gave me a lot of space to be with my questions and with my not knowings, and find teachers and mentors that knew how to push me in all the right ways, and read things that were I couldn't really have access to within the specific bubble I was in back home, as Asaf mentions, segregation and other forces that have maintained my life in Tel Aviv very separated from everything that was happening around. And yeah, so I think for me, like the move here was like this moment where things opened, clicked. I met Palestinians for the first time, got to like share stories, begin stories together. And then when I went back for a visit, I went into the West Bank for the first time and have been returning on my visits. So I have to say that I think where I'm at is that I have my family and friends in Israel that are not anti-Zionist. And because of that, we have relationships that are complicated and are places to be shaped and shape constantly in. And then I have my communities here that have taught me so much. And also, I think for me, like, so Shoresh, the group that Asaf is one of their founders, started a couple of months ago. And that was for me kind of the first time that I was in one space with tens of, I think we were 75 in that first meeting of anti-Zionist Israelis. Like that was my first time of experiencing something like that. So I think before that, I think I kind of find myself in queer, anti-Zionist, Jewish American circles, where I feel like I'm so happy this is happening. I'm so happy you're doing this. And I'm 1.5 foot in. Like there's always like a little bit that makes me feel like I don't want to change anything because this needs to be what it is. And I also need something that is not here. And I'm so grateful that we're starting to find that. And then I can say that like my organizing, like I have, through the work that I've been doing, I have friends and organizers who work in Palestinian organizations in the West Bank and in Gaza, and have relationships that are built on mutual work and mutual amplification of each other, and that is also like a different kind of a relationship where we get to build it over the years. So yeah, I think it's kind of like fractured in those ways where I get to like fill my cup in different places in different ways, and I get to empty my cup because I choose to in different places in different ways. I will pass to Hadar to just switch it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha, for that beautiful question. It's actually something I think about quite a lot. My work takes me to all sorts of different places, and I speak to so many different communities and on so many different lands. And, you know, what I'm saying is the same because it's still me and it's still my truth. But the context in which I'm saying it shifts. And I think that in general, when I live in Los Angeles now, and I think that in the US, sometimes it feels to me that there's a lot of intellectualization of Palestine, or, you know, some of the dynamics, or sometimes a nostalgia or fantasy. And it feels like it's a very thought experiment for a lot of people, that sometimes there feels like there's a disconnection from the levels of pain, the levels of suffering, the levels of the material reality, and what it means to actually contend with that in a real way. And when I go back to Jerusalem, where my family still is, it's like, it's just so visible and so visceral and screaming and raging, and you know, because it's the pain, and then it's all the emotions that are related to the pain, and then right, there's also the intellectual analysis, the political analysis through that. But just the level of like yeah, I think something that just really sits in my body. And I think one of the things that's really hard, especially speaking about occupation or apartheid, it's like, if you don't see it with your eyes, it's kind of hard to understand what everybody's talking about. But the second you see it with your eyes, it there's no way you can't talk about it, because it's just so brutal. And there's so much cruelty there, and there's so much dehumanization. And I think it's like having those experiences of witnessing, of being part of activism on the ground in the West Bank, and it just stays with you forever in a way that just completely transforms how you think about it. And once you experience that, it's just like, you know, the conversation that you're having about it becomes changed. And I think sometimes in the US context, there's a lot of kind of talking about it, which is important, but sometimes it feels like, right, and that's where it gets really tricky, because it's a lot easier to just, right, say ideas when you don't see the direct material impact it has on the ground. And I think that's part of my frustration sometimes. But at the same time, you know, one of the things that is, you know, because I go back and forth a lot, and I think that, you know, in the US context, there's also a very strong desire and need, almost, I would say, to position Palestinian oppression and Palestinian liberation in the context of other racial struggles as well, right? And I think there's something really beautiful there, as in that international solidarity, in this understanding, right? Multiple systems of oppression are interconnected, right? And I think, especially in this moment, right, it's undeniable the levels of like US imperialism and the harm that is connected to, and domestic issues here as well. So just all of these different relationships that you can really kind of see all of that. Where back when I'm, you know, in the Jerusalem context, it's the US feels more like a fantasy, right? So because it feels farther away. So those are some of the dynamics, and I will say that also it's just like, you know, when you're kind of more far away and removed from something, sometimes it's easier to see it clearly, and sometimes it's necessary to have a certain level of distance to be able to see something clearly. And there's a cost to that, because part of what is missing when you kind of zoom out is that you also lose connection a bit with the embodied experience of what it's like to be in it. And I think it's been, you know, something I've been thinking a lot about, especially about perspective, about the difference between perspective from being like on the ground versus perspective from being outside of it and viewing it. And I think they both offer really important insights, but just in different ways. And, you know, something that I would like, as someone who's also a healer and focuses a lot on the levels of the body and what the body carries, is that just the level of trauma and emotional reactivity, and just the dimension of the emotional body, the physical body, all of these, how that's impacting the way we even have conversations about this crisis. Yeah, so I'll pass that to Asaf.
Thank you both so much. And so I think I'm gonna continue this thread of the materiality and viscerality of it, because it's true, there are kind of material stakes that I think no one other than Palestinians in the United States can fully relate to. And that is not, I'm not saying it to discourage other Americans from participating in this. We need you, like we need you very much. It's really important that people that don't have a direct stake will nevertheless participate in the struggle. This is how we eventually win. Like, we need international pressure. Nevertheless, that materiality, those material stakes do make a difference. And I think I noticed it first so I've been living here for 8 years. And at first, when I moved here, I really, even though I organized in Israel, right, as an anti-Zionist already, I moved here and I kind of joined the American Jewish movement. Again, you know, for Palestinian liberation. And I found my place there really, and it was, you know, I felt like I was doing really effective work. I still think it's effective work, but at some point something broke, it was in 2021 actually when there was an attack on Gaza back then, and it was probably the worst time in recent years, before October 7th, in terms of an explosion of violence. And I remember sensing this sense of like, well, on one hand, right, there is this brutal assault of Gaza. And on the other hand, my parents are in a bomb shelter. And then I was like, hold on a sec. It's not on one hand and on the other hand. These two things are so deeply, viscerally connected, right? The material stakes that we have in the dismantling of apartheid are that our safety, the safety of our family, is deeply tied to it, right? So we operate out of solidarity with Palestinians, and we understand that our fates are completely tied to theirs, right? On a more to more directly maybe answer your question about what's the difference between organizing here and organizing there. I think one thing that's really important to understand is that there is the freedom of speech in Israel is much more limited. People are being even I think just today people have been protesting against the genocide in Gaza, and the police tore down their signs, right? So the level of suppression, not that it doesn't exist in the United States, but the level of suppression that exists in Israel is extreme. And so it's very hard to operate, because being in the so-called in the radical left, right, in the anti-Zionist left in Israel, puts you very much outside the pale, right, in terms of what is considered legitimate expression, right, in Israeli society. So you'll be attacked not just by police, you'll be attacked also by people in the street, and you'll be facing consequences for your families. So the left in Israel is besieged, and so it's very, very hard to do things that we can do here, like strategizing and having a theory of change and all that. Nevertheless, people do it. People keep on fighting. People keep on going to the street. Even now, especially now, right? There are people in Israel that oppose apartheid, that support democracy, that support Palestinian liberation, that oppose the genocide, and they keep doing it. And it's really important that we support them. And it's really important that we understand that in order to do it, in order to operate under those conditions, what is possible here is not necessarily possible there. There are people in Israel who completely agree with me on just about anything, but will not advertise themselves as anti-Zionists because the repercussions are really, really severe. People can lose their jobs. People can, like the repercussions are really severe, and it's so we need to understand the context in which people are operating, and we need to support them because I think my theory of change is that their internal opposition to apartheid is crucial. And one more thing, just to be very clear, there are different kinds of oppression within Israeli society as well. So when you are a Palestinian, that is not a citizen in the West Bank and Gaza, their level of oppression is one thing. When you're a Palestinian citizen, level of oppression is different. When you're a Jewish, white Jewish as opposed to Mizrahi Jewish, the level of oppression is different. There is a very strict hierarchy within Israeli society, which is part of why we need to dismantle this whole system, but it also affects how much level of freedom of speech people do have.
I'm going to ask a follow-up based on some of the stuff that you guys said. I think this goes back to Hadar. I got into filmmaking because I was convinced if people knew what I knew, then they would change, right? Like I started filming, animal cruelty when I was in high school. And I was like, oh, surely people will stop testing on animals if they just see it. And we see now that, the ICJ, publicly said this is the first time in history, right, that people are live streaming their own genocide. And you were talking about it's different to witness it. And once you witness it, you can't not talk about it. And the whole world is witnessing it now, right? And I think all you guys, certainly because you were born there, but I started working in Palestine solidarity 18 years ago, and there wasn't that much witnessing. That's why I went there to teach kids how to film and document the harassment they were getting from settlers so they could put their stories online pre-YouTube so that people would see, because clearly if people knew what was happening, they would change. And I'm curious now that the world is watching, if you feel like witnessing is doing anything. What is this witnessing accomplishing in terms of Palestinian liberation?
Yeah, beautiful question. I can share some of my perspective on that. Well, first, I just want to say, even spiritually, right? This level of when there's a genocide and massacres and intense levels of brutal suffering, and it seems like, we can't change the situation, even though, of course, the action part is important. But just this element of bearing witness is so important, to visibilize, to remember, to witness. And I think that is that's something that has really moved me in the last 2 months, is just how much of the world is actually turning its attention to this. And I think just the quality in itself of just giving attention, observing, witnessing, there's something really, really powerful there. Now, of course, it's like we also want to actually change the situation. We actually want a ceasefire. We actually want an end to the genocide. We also want an end to the apartheid system, which is what got us here in the first place, and to the system of really what it is Jewish supremacy on the land, right? Where if you're Jewish, you have more rights, and if you're not Jewish and you're Palestinian, right, you have less rights. And of course, there's all sorts of other communities also living in the land that don't fall neatly into either identity, but that's overall. And I think that it's a massive system that has for decades, right, been intensified through militarization and through propaganda and governmental control. So how we dismantle that as a system of oppression, I think there's so many people who are trying so many different things right now. And my thing is we have to try as many things as possible, right? There's space for the direct action, there's space for the artists, there's space for the writers, there's space for the healers, there's space for all, and I think that what I want to encourage everybody is to find their own pathway into what feels aligned for them in showing up for this, right? Not everybody has to do everything, but every person has to do something. And to find what that something is. Because I think that there is something, I do feel that the narrative is cracking. I think that there's been something that has been really shifting worldwide. And I think part of it is also, especially here, is waking up to the US military system and how destructive it is. Especially in the Swana region, and especially in Palestine right now. But just, there is a waking up to that. And there's also a waking up to what's been happening, right, in this kind of weaponization of Jewish trauma and anti-Semitism, right? This whole conversation has become so alive, and something is shifting. Now, the tragic heartbreak of that is that the cost is and has been so high way too high. And that has come at, at Palestinian death, is what it has caused people to wake up and to continue waking up. So there's something that is just unbelievably heartbreaking about that. And it's like something that it's like, something that I feel is that there's just no other, I mean, especially it's like Jerusalem is my past, Jerusalem is my family's there. Like I cannot walk away from this. This is gonna be my whole life. So it's like, whatever it is for me, it's like we just have to keep trying. We have to keep trying until something works. And I, I'm not going to say that I have all the answers, because I don't. I just have different ways of trying, and different times I try different things. And I think that the more people that we have with us who are having these conversations, having actions, who are also I also want to present the emotional layer, which is, again, right, also important, because so often so much of these narratives are sitting on trauma and emotional wounding. And when we even just do that personal healing work around examining that and not letting the fear and the pain rule. I have a Palestinian activist who says to me all the time is that we have this common enemy, and that's fear. And part of what we're trying to really shift, right, is this fear-mongering, weaponization, militarization. The only way to be safe is to attack and defense. And, this game show that is costing so much human life. And this, and I think that's where it's also for me, sorry, this is like a whole long stage rant, but just this, like hope is not really an option for any of us. Like we just have to keep on having hope, because we need a different future. Like we just need it. We need a future in which Palestinians are free, and they have their stories and their identities and their realities be told and understood to the world. And we also need Jews alongside them, right? Like, so something needs to shift massively. And the more people that are on board to support that collective shift, the easier it is for all of us, right? Because it can't just be one person here, a group here, a group there. We really need as many people as possible.
Thank you, Hadar. I want to add something to that, two things. One is like coming back to your question, Sasha, about the whole world is watching. I would add to that, most of the world is watching, and not most of Israel is watching. Israel is actually not watching the genocide in the way that we are watching the genocide from here. And that has to do with many things. First of all, the media and the propaganda, and how the media chooses to frame things, and algorithm, and what you get to see and who you get to follow, and what is like eliminated from that. But also there's something, again, in the like body, in the indoctrination. Even if they see, they don't see. And I can say it about like my own experience. I was driving as an undergrad from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem every day for my school. And I drove through, for those of you who know, 443, the like back road to Jerusalem, which means I drove by the wall every day, backward and forward. And I didn't understand that that's what I'm driving through, that that's an apartheid wall and what this wall is doing. None of that was present for me, because I was trained to see it as something that keeps me safe, as something we need to have, as something that maintains my feeling of belonging. So when I tell people in Israel that every 10 minutes a child in Gaza is being murdered, they don't believe me. When I show them a photo, they don't see what I see. And that I think is something, again, the work that we need to do right now is, again, whether it's direct action, however, wherever you find yourself, but we are living in times of genocide, which means we need to learn to care, which means we need to learn to grieve. And I say this specifically to Israelis. If you have grieved one part of this and have not grieved the other part of it, I really invite you to find one name, one image. There's one image that's been hunting me for weeks now. that I've been just sitting with and crying with and grieving with. Just find one thing that you can connect to outside of the things that told you that need to maintain this them versus us. Just find one thing to relate to and really care about it within yourself, and find like that heart connection to this one death. And then from that, maybe there's going to be another one. But I really think that, you know, like what we're seeing IDF soldiers right now doing inside Gaza, they are not seeing what we're seeing them doing in their own consciousness. And that takes like training. That is not about just like the time that they spend in the army. It's generational. So I think there's also just finding one person that you can help. Just sit with one person, light a candle, tell them a story. Just find a way to really hold the care. And again, I see it also like here within this, like, you know, business as usual, where we're all kind of like in this, grieving this, while also like needing to go to work and needing to go to all these other things, and really want to invite all of us, including myself, to just present this constantly, to make every like dinner into a liberation conversation, to make every opportunity of gathering to a place where we get to hold each other in our grief. Because that grief and that level of care and depth, I think, is really one of the ways where we get to imagine otherwise. And that's what is needed from where I'm at.
So I mean, yeah, I really agree with that, and thank you for that. And like this, I've had a lot of conversations about this with a lot of Israelis, as you can imagine, and there is this really deep level of denial about what is actually going on. And I would say more than that, I think Meital also touched on it, like the denial is, it's not just now, right? I mean, denial is this like deeply ingrained part of Israeli existence. I mean, growing up in Tel Aviv, they told me that Tel Aviv was built on sand, right? But you can walk through Tel Aviv and you will see ruins. I mean, you will see ruins, right? You see like all, see these like old buildings, and you are sort of trained not to wonder what was there, right, before. The truth of it is, of course, that large swaths of Tel Aviv were built on destroyed Palestinian communities that were destroyed in the Nakba, and the people forced to flee, most of them to Gaza. So these are the same people that are being bombed, and the children and grandchildren are being bombed now. So denial is this really deep part of Israeli existence, but that also means that we are not only in denial about the the crimes that we are committing, we are also in denial about the harm that we are causing to ourselves all the time. And I think we've seen it in October 7th, because people have been saying things like to me, things like, we no longer feel safe, and we need to find a way to bring back the sense of safety that we were feeling before October 7th. Hence, support for the war, right? Which, to that, it's like I think only from having lived here in a place where I don't have to like run for shelter every few years, and in a place where I don't have to be surrounded by violence my entire life. It's New York City, so I like kind of do. There is NYPD here, but not to the same extreme level. I ask, what were you thinking? What was that sense of security that you were feeling, if not just in extreme denial of the precarity of your own living conditions, where you have to send your children to the military, and you have to endure this unending bloodshed. And I think I'm not against the idea that, like, there are, I think, Israelis that we should encourage people to have empathy for Palestinians. But I am a little skeptical about it in like large, like about how to sort of extend that to the majority of Israelis. But I think that if we can get Israelis to start to break that denialism about their own safety and the safety of their own families, and show them how it is so deeply and directly correlated with the oppression and the violence that we ourselves impose on the Palestinians, then we might be able to move something, right? So witnessing is important, but even if there's things in front of your eyes and you can't see, so we need to break through that with analysis and with counter narratives to the ruling narrative of the Israeli state.
Sorry, I've become default moderator. I think we should move into some of the Q&A questions. I'm going to try and oh, Dylan has appeared. Are you going to ask some about these questions for us? Great.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, first of all, to you all for opening up this discussion so beautifully. And thanks, special shout out to attendees for sending forward such thoughtful questions, both on email and through Zoom. So I'm going to do my best to curate just maybe a couple questions to maximize your engagement with them. So I'm going to combine a couple questions actually for the first one, and you all just take it on as you wish. And I'm going to attribute the questions for folks that attach their names to them. So Andrew Dershimer, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, is really curious to know how each of you defines anti-Zionism. I think this is a really critical question for us to use, especially if we're going to record this event and circulate it as part of political education for others. I think it'd be really fascinating and important, urgent, to kind of, cultivate definitions of anti-Zionism that come from your work. And then paired to that, another attendee sent an email question that is asking you all to respond to those who would try to frame anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. And of course, this is one of the primary fronts of ideological and political warfare that's happening right now, especially at universities, colleges, and other institutions. So yeah, you all just take those on, I think would be great.
I'm happy to take first leaps at that one. Well, first of all, so my definition of Zionism, I think, is pretty straightforward. Zionism, as I understand it, is the ruling ideology of the Israeli state, which is that Israel needs to be a that there has to be an ethnic Jewish state or Jewish ethno state in this land that they call Israel, some people call Palestine, right? In that land. And so that is Zionism. And anti-Zionism is opposing that idea that ethno-state, that ethno state or that ethno state of any kind need to exist. And I believe that it is that the existence of this ethnic nature of the state is anti-democratic, is inherently oppressive, and it is not in line with Palestinian humanity, and therefore not in line with Jewish safety in Israel and Palestine. So you're asking what to say when people say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and I think so. I mean, it's like it very clearly isn't because I mean, like, we're Jews. We believe in Jewish life, Jewish existence, believe in Jewish existence in Palestine. And we oppose this particular political formation, which we don't think is just, which we don't think is in our interest, right? And I think that in the United States, the American anti-Zionist Jewish movement has made a really good work of showing how anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Now, our job as Israelis is to show why anti-Zionism is not merely not anti-Semitism, but is not opposed to the interests of the Israeli people. It is, in fact, completely in line with the interests of the Israeli people, which is to live in safety and prosperity. This simply cannot happen under Zionism.
Thanks, Asaf, for starting us off. I would add to that for me, first of all, I would say that anti-Zionism is a spiritual learning space in which I get to unwind, connect to the earth, and connect to who I am outside of identities. It's the space of connectivity to the elements within and without. That's like a personal anchor to me. To me, also, Zionism and Israeli identity are one of the same. And for a free land of Palestine, for me, both of those things cannot exist. I don't see a world in which I get to be an Israeli on a free Palestine land. I see a world in which I might need to leave the land, even though I have a lineage that is from that land, for the land to recover. And so anti-Zionism for me is the undoing of the things that make me think I have any kind of superiority or claim to anything that has to do with identity or the land. And from that place, I get to return to Jewishness as a lineage, as an anchor. And again, I was raised very Israeli, not very Jewish, which is a very common thing. And I returned to Judaism from specifically Sephardic and Ashkenazi line of my lineage as a healing process, because when I match Zionism and Judaism, they don't match. They can't coexist, which is, I think, a part of the disassociation of my upbringing. So for me, anti-Zionism is a commitment to a free land of Palestine. And I want to take like another like personal note here. Like, I feel such connected to that land, to those waters, to those trees. When I'm there are parts of me that get nourished that don't get nourished anywhere else. And I also know that I might need to leave for the land to heal. So anti-Zionism also to me means that I don't get to imagine what is next. I get to imagine my freedom in what is next and showing up to that. So it's the complete undoing of any kind of territory, of connection between territory and my body. And from that place, also to put it into an anti-Semitic perspective, right? Like, anti-Semitism is not something that I do or undo or contribute to or not. Anti-Semitism, as well as racism, as well as any kind of form of oppression towards a group of people, right, has to do with other things, has to do with the way that the superiority and other systems of oppression have ruled this planet we're on, has to do with colonialism, has to do with so many things. So my criticizing of oppression, if that is not a form to undo anti-Semitism, like how can my fight to end oppression can be anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitism is the oppression, and I'm fighting to end it for everybody, right? By like showing up for this fight. So how can those two things match? I am criticizing apartheid, occupation, genocide. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. There's nothing racist about that. but it doesn't mean that those forces don't live outside of that as well.
Thanks, Meital. Yeah, I'll just add my thoughts about what everybody's been saying about this. There's something about, right, this question of the Jews and then the question of Palestine and the way that they're interwoven, and sometimes the narrative seems like it's like you have to choose. You have to choose like Jewish safety or Palestinian freedom, and you can't have both. And there's a very intentional way that narrative has been created, and it's particularly been created by European colonial powers, right? And I think that it's really important to, I think that absolutely fighting anti-Semitism is part of like freedom for Palestinians as well, right? Because all systems of oppression are interconnected. Here we have a situation where it seems so convoluted how all these systems are working, but in the aftermath of the Holocaust, right? Europe always had a Jewish problem. It always had issues with Jewish presence, and anti-Semitism started as a European Christian phenomenon. So, I think understanding that context, that part of, right, Britain, like gifting Palestine to the Jews, was actually part of this continued anti-Semitic project to get rid of the Jews from Europe, right? And I think that it's really important to name that, because if you look at what's kind of happening, and it's been kind of successful, is that project, right? Anti-Semitism basically says that Jews as Jewish people are fundamentally unsafe in the world. And therefore, they need a nation state in which no one else can have rights. Only Jewish people can have, right, the superior rights. And they need to be separated out from the world. They can't interact, they can't talk, they can't, like it kind of is forming a Jewish ghetto on some level in Palestine. And I think there's something deeply anti-Semitic about that, to start out with the premise of saying that Jews are fundamentally unsafe in this world. And I think part of my anti-Zionism is also saying like, no, actually, Jews should be safe everywhere. And there's responsibility in whatever context that they're in, of the governments, of the communities, to make sure that Jews are safe everywhere, because Jews are from everywhere, right? There's beautiful Jewish lineages all over the world. And I think one of the tragedies that I certainly feel, I mean, definitely from my own perspective of Arab Jewish lineage, but I know that it's not just in that context, right? But the destruction of so many Jewish lineages, of Jewish languages, of Jewish, life in so many parts of the world, and the flattening of that in support of Israel, right? Now everything's kind of become about Israel. So there's a way in which thousands of years of Jewishness has kind of been erased and destroyed in order to create, right, the new Jew, the new Jew, which is the Israeli Jew. So that whole project is already deeply anti-Semitic. And I think that I really want to live in a world where Jews are able to live everywhere because they're safe everywhere, right? And Jews are welcomed as Jews, in whatever place they're in. So I think for me, part of deconstructing Zionism is also, right, deconstructing this conversation around, well, why was the answer to the Holocaust Jews should get out of Europe and move to Palestine? Why isn't the answer like, let's look at anti-Semitism, especially in the West, especially in Europe, in the US, and how do we actually fight anti-Semitism so that Jewish people are safe, so that we don't need, this Zionist project, which, as we see from a lot of the narrative, that so much of Zionist narrative literally feeds off Jewish trauma and Jewish fear, and that's part of why it's successful. Originally when Zionism started, it was really a fringe movement in the Jewish world, even in European and Ashkenazi Jewish communities, because people didn't see the appeal to it. But the reason why Zionism took off and became mainstream in the Jewish community was because there was a real issue of Jewish safety, and people were feeling traumatized and scared and pained in all these ways. And there's a way in which Zionism was sold as this Jewish liberation movement. Now, of course, as I think Meital and Asaf and Sasha have been talking about, right? It's like the level of denial of what the cost of Zionism has been to Palestinians is something that is still like a blind spot in a lot of Israeli and Jewish communities. And that's part of what we're trying to awaken. It's like, actually, this Zionist movement that was sold as a Jewish liberation movement, it did not liberate the Jewish people. What it did is created us into, right, this transference of trauma into this oppressor role that is actually not comfortable for us, right? It doesn't keep Jews safe, and it doesn't liberate us, as also in the spiritual level. So I think in that way, it's like understanding that Zionism really actually harms both Palestinian and Jewish people. Palestinians, of course, are suffering the most direct impact of that physically, through the levels of intense ongoing violence that's really, so on so many dimensions and so many levels. And on top of that, right, the Jewish soul, if you will, is also suffering, right? Because that's not what Jewishness means, right? Jewishness is not about oppressing Palestinians, and we need to deconstruct what has become of that.
I do. I don't know if we have that much time, but I do feel a need to reply to Meytal.
Wait,
that's okay.
Asaf, let Sasha say some words.
Sorry. I wanted to echo off of Hadar in the sense that, and I'm just going to come at this as the, faith tradition person sort of perspective. Judaism has such deep values for caring for land, caring for stranger, caring, and deeply the Zionist movement, this ethno-state that exists, is not part of Jewish faith tradition. And this setup that the two are interlinked is why Zionism benefits from anti-Semitism, because they've conflated the two so deeply that we're constantly fighting this conversation that doesn't need to be setting us apart from each other, that are working towards Palestinian liberation. And I also just want to mention, because it hasn't been talked about yet, kind of maybe looking at the power structure of what's happening within the world of Zionism. There is a single Christian Zionist organization in this country that has more members than there are Jews in the world. And they are funding largely what is happening. And so if we want to equate anti-Zionism to being any anti-religion, then it's anti-Zionism is anti-Christian hegemony, which, great, let's all get on board. And I think that there's, not to relieve Jews of our responsibility to that land and the way that we have been intertwined within the Zionist project, but the fact that this is all happening in our name, as they say, but it's being done by a lot of Christians who have a vested interest in this project in a religious way, to bring about, the second coming, which is based on Jews' destruction, which is also anti-Semitic. So this constant struggle, and I feel like Jewish communities started picking up that same sort of conversation and echoing it without realizing what our own tradition says, and based on this larger context conversation. But if you look in their tradition, in our lineage, the Zionism is not, it's just not part of our tradition, in the spiritual practice. Sorry, I'll stop.
Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate that. But I want to reply to the idea that you raised, Meital, that Jews, or Israeli Jews, might have to leave Palestine in order to achieve this healing, this justice, this decolonization. My position and position of Shoresh is that nobody is going to need to leave. We don't need to leave. Jews have always existed in Palestine. And the land doesn't need us to leave. What needs to happen is that we need to give up on a lot of things. We need to give up on privileges. We need to give up on power. We need to give up on the Jewish ethno-state. We need to create a whole new way of existing there, through democracy, through economic reform, through whatever complex processes of justice and healing and reparations and reconciliations. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be really complex. But I strongly oppose the idea that that Israelis are going to need to leave, and I don't think it's possible. I don't think that most Israelis have where to go, and I don't think that most Palestinians want that either. I think that the idea of democracy and justice from the river to the sea doesn't require any sort of population demographic change. It requires ideological change. It requires political change, economic change. It requires return of all Palestinian refugees, and it requires completely overhauling the system, but it doesn't require immigration.
Yeah, I hear that. And I'm not speaking about like an exodus out of Israel. I'm speaking about, for me, there's like a level of humility, of understanding that we don't know what is going to be asked of us. And we should start getting ready to be very uncomfortable. And it doesn't mean that we're going to get hurt in the process. It doesn't mean that we're going to be asked to leave. But I think there's a level of, again, for me, it comes back to humility. Like what I'm trying to do right now in my body is to imagine myself free when that land is free, so that I can come up and show up for the imagination of Palestinians and what they want this land to be. I don't think a two-state solution is possible. I don't even think one state is possible. I think the land of Palestine needs to breathe differently, and the people that have been harmed there the most will have the privilege to decide what is healing looks like. How does healing look like? And in my imagination, I am getting ready to like let go of our homes. And where we live after that, I don't know yet. I don't know anything, but I'm ready to get really uncomfortable and show up for what the land needs before I'm showing up for what I need or what I feel like I have ownership on, including the conversation. I might be asked to not even be a part of the conversation, and I think I need to get ready for that discomfort as well.
I appreciate both of you for bringing this this antagonism or this debate forward. I think I'm gonna let that stay there, and because I think that's an ongoing, intensive conversation that's collective, and it obviously extends well beyond this particular time and space. But I appreciate you all for bringing that forward. I know we're getting close to time, but I did want to honor another question that was brought forward by an attendee, Dorian Vanunu, and it links directly to, I think, the flow of where you all have been moving in the last few minutes. So they ask, can you talk about what dismantling this system can look like? That is to help build the imagination of what an anti-Zionist future can look like on the land. So it's a land-centered question that I think really is appropriate to the way you all are thinking through these questions right now.
I'm not sure I understand if the system is a specific system. Are we talking about Zionist system as a system?
Let's move with the notion that we're talking about the abolition of Zionism, the end of Zionism as a land-based apparatus or ensemble of power. So apologies, Dorian, if I manipulated or, you know, messed with your question too much. But yeah, I'm trying to like center it in a certain kind of relation to land.
Yeah. I can start speaking a bit and see where we go. So two things I think are really important. One is that unfortunately we've gotten to a place in Israeli society where it's really hard to imagine the change coming from inside of Israeli society. And part of that, and I think Meital, you touched base at this in the beginning, is that Israelis, for the most part, are not seeing what is happening in Gaza. And part of the reason why they're not seeing it is because there is a governmental media, you know, in some ways you can think about it as like one of the most successful disinformation campaigns in the world, really, governmental control. That is really not, you know, the Israeli media, the way that they're painting what's happening. I mean, especially like, and I actually was on the land October 7th for the first week. So like, you know, I was really seeing a lot of how these narratives were being built. But so much of what, you know, the politicians were saying, it's like, well, it's either we go back to Auschwitz or we bomb Gaza. So when the Israeli public is given those two options, they're going to be like, well, we have to bomb Gaza then, right? And then that kind of narrative starts building because those are positioned. It's like, well, we can't go back to Auschwitz. We don't want that. So there's been just an intense media control of the Israeli public to the extent that Israelis largely do not know what is happening right under their noses. And you know, part of that is the denial, is the not wanting to know, all of that. That is all leading into a situation where international pressure is really, really important. And it's, to me, one of the only paths right now is that we actually need international pressure. You know, we had this South Africa came with, you know, taking Israel to court and to trial, and we'll see kind of what happens. I think that is a really important move. I think having the international community, especially people who are less affected by it, people who don't hold identities that are directly impacted, making conversations about this, I find that to be really important because it challenges people who are within these to say like, hey, we need to really understand where we stand on these issues because we're not, and within the Israeli community itself, it's just spiraling. So the international pressure is actually, you know, sometimes I think about it also from a trauma lens. It feels like it's like, you know, sometimes in the psychology world, you talk about it as like you have a younger child part, and sometimes it throws a tantrum and it's like leading the show. And that's when you have to say, like, you can't drive the bus, you can sit on the car ride, but you can't be in charge if you're in the tantrum. And I think what's become of the Israeli state is that amplified times however many, right, with Jewish trauma, that like this trauma fear is just completely running the show, the revenge, the military. So we need an international accountability that's like, hey, wait a minute, you cannot do that. You cannot just get endless supplies to militarize and to kill and to murder. Like there needs to be that, because if there isn't that accountability and that international pressure, we're just going to keep cycling worse and worse. And, you know, I feel like since I was born, every year it has been getting worse. So I think that's one core piece. And a part of me is like sad that we've kind of gotten in there, right? Because I did have this hope that like within Israeli society, like maybe we could just figure it out, but we haven't been able to do that. So we've got to a stage where international pressure feels really important. Now, with that, I will say that I also hold that, right, the reality is that you do have Palestinians, Israelis living on that land. And part of what physical apartheid has done in terms of segregating and controlling the lives of Palestinians, it has also relationally segregated people, that people just don't know each other. Jews, Israelis don't, even in the diaspora, I see this, right? Even in the US, where like for an American Jew, like it actually should not be that much of a problem to meet a Palestinian person, but there's a relational segregation that's been created in our community. So we don't speak, we're not in community, we don't have as much relational networks. And to me, that is going to be a huge part of the healing of what it looks like to actually dismantle the system, right? Because again, there's layers to it. So it's like, what does that look like to actually have relationships again? Because I think once you're in a relationship with someone who is impacted, who's in pain, who, you see the impact of the system on them, it's like, then it's kind of game over. The second you love someone and you see it up close, right? So I think that there's a really important thing here about relationships and relationship building. Now, of course, in some ways, these things are kind of mutually, they sometimes feel like contradictory or different steps, but I really feel that we need the both, right? We need the international action and really putting pressure to shift the situation. And at the same time, we need to build relationships and we need to build, right, this way where we can actually be like committed to a shared future together, where I'm really honoring, each other's humanities and our stories, and to seeing Palestinians and for Jews to do our healing so we can also, show up to that. And I will share that, my experience largely with Palestinian community is that they love me so much because of my Jewishness. Like I've had Palestinian activists say that to me, that it's like, they're like, because I teach Jewish mysticism and Judaism, and like the love that, I had so many Palestinians call me sometimes being like, I want to do Shabbat with you. Like, and like this notion that like actually just being secular, anti-Zionist, Jewish, disconnected from everything, perhaps is not the only way, right? We can still be fully grounded in our Jewishness and in our Jewish ritual and our tradition. And that can also be a gift to Palestinians if it's coming from a place of shared solidarity. So those are some of my thoughts and ideas.
Sasha, you want to add some words?
I mean, I think I come from a place of being an American. And I think my answer is that it's up to the oppressed to determine what justice looks like for them. And it's up to the people living, as I think one of you talked about this earlier, that the left and the anti-Zionist movement, the left, people in America have this sort of nostalgic and romanticized vision of what land back looks like and what should be happening in Palestine. And I don't think that that's my place to have a solution or even an opinion. I think that Palestinians should be in charge of what their future looks like, because they haven't had the power to do that in a very long time. And so I think that my hope is that that is what happens. Whatever they're calling for is the future that we get to live in. And yeah, I think that was it. Thanks for that, Meital. But I would also like you and Asaf to answer this question.
That's the big one, right? I mean, like I think um it's gonna take organizing. Like it's gonna take organizing here, it's gonna take organizing inside Israel by Israeli Jews, and it's gonna take organizing by Palestinians, obviously. And we don't have, I mean, like we don't have a roadmap to it. But I think we know what the goal is. I think we know what needs to happen. Like um and I think to me, I feel like my role in all of this um is to show other Israelis why this needs to happen and why it's not going to be and why it's in their interest and why it's not going to be the disaster, the absolute uh, uh, Armageddon that they believe it would be. That there is life in Palestine after the state of Israel, because the state of Israel doesn't work. And so I think, I think different people have different roles, right? Like we need international pressure, we need Palestinian pressure, and we need internal pressure. And we as Israelis in the United States, we have a very particular role to play, which is both to connect the struggle here with the struggle over there, and to empower the people uh, that are fighting apartheid from within, um, as well as we have the privilege of being able to imagine, which I think a lot of people over there can't. And so um, we have to we have to build this future um, in our imagination first. And then we have to show people that it's possible, and that it's worth it, it's um, and that it must happen. Um, and we do that with combination of pressure and um, and hope and um, and tenacity and optimism and imagination, um, and we don't give up.
I will add just a couple sentences. I know we're getting close to the end. I think for me, there's so much work we need to do in our bodies right now and in our lineages right now. And I kind of said it before, kind of connected to what I'm saying now. For me, I don't think we get to imagine what's next. We need to like undo all these knots that are in our bodies that have to do with victimhood and fear and deep, deep, deep trauma that is so alive in us. So for me, it's really about finding those knots, present, past, and future, and really individually, communally, in the families, in the chosen family, doing the work of undoing and getting to a place of love and freedom, that when we show up to what is asked of us, we show up from a place of love, of wanting to offer this, of wanting this, because we understand that it's our freedom is intertwined in that. And when we come to it from a place of I'm thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh and love in action, like when we come to it from a place of, I did the work here, so I'm ready to show up, and I'm showing up from love, and I'm showing up for the land. I think that's really the work that we must start now in ourselves and with the people that we have relations with. And with that, I think we're going to come to a little closing. Does that feel true, panelists? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so before, I just want to thank everyone here, Sasha, Hadar, Asaf, thank you so much for your time and your heart and your friendship and your care and just the way that you walk on the lands you call home, and the way that you show up for this. It's an honor to know each one of you. Thank you, Dylan, and the team of Decolonizing Humanism, and to everyone in UCR who helped us make this happen. And thank you to our audiences, wherever you're at. Thank you so much for being with us and for leaning into this discomfort and those tensions and these places of love and restoration with us. And to close, just want to return to what Hadar started with, and just find our bodies, find your legs, find the earth beneath you, whether you're sitting or standing, or some of you maybe are making dinner, but just find the earth for a second. And may all the words that were shared here land in all the ways you need to transform what needs to be transformed, and to heal what needs to be healed, and to open what is needing to be open. I want to remind us as we close and we get into this nighttime here on Turtle Island that the sun is rising in Palestine right now. And bodies have been murdered in the time that we've talked here. Bodies are under the rubble right now as the sun is rising. And it's the same sun that grows our food all over this planet. So as the moon rises here and the sun rises there, may we remember our interconnectedness, and may we open our hearts to everything that is unknown and possible. And with that, let's take 2 breaths. I don't know why 2, let's take 3 breaths. Just really deeply, if you can find in your inhale, your chest, your belly, maybe put your hands on your chest and your belly. Hold it in for a sec, let it out. Chest, belly, hold it in, let it out. One more in your own time. Thank you so much.